Today we begin our study of the Analects of Confucius together. The main purpose of studying the Analects is this. We want to understand what ideas from traditional culture are still worth drawing on today. And there is another reason studying the Analects right now is particularly timely and relevant. There is much in it that holds up remarkably well. Now, truth be told, I have no oral transmission of the Analects, nor have I attended any teachings on it. I simply spent some time reflecting on it before each class, and that is what I share with you here. I believe some of you may have come across explanations far better than mine, but that is fine. In any case, as Confucius himself recognized, everyone has their strengths and their blind spots. No one is a genius at everything. Reading the Analects, you will find some passages feel quite exceptional, while others feel distant, partly because so much time has passed, and also because at a deeper level, this cultural tradition may not be one that many of us grew up immersed in, so there are parts I am not all that familiar with either. I read it before, but lately I have had no time. Looking at some professors and teachers and how they explain it, you will find that certain passages are interpreted in quite different ways. Regardless, let us explore it together. So today we continue from where we left off last time. I am not sure what page you are on, but you should know that yourselves. Now here, Confucius says, the master said, regarding the Guanzhong, joyful yet not excessive, sorrowful yet not distressing, and that is the line we are examining today. Here, Confucius was quoting on the Book of Songs for those around him. The Book of Songs holds a very important place in ancient traditional culture. The Book of Songs varies in length, some pieces longer, some shorter, but in total it contains around 300 poems. The very first poem in the Book of Songs is mainly about worldly feelings and emotions. So what does it say? Joyful yet not excessive. The first poem is called Guanzhong, and what it teaches is this: joyful yet not excessive, sorrowful yet not distressing. What does this mean? The poem itself seems to suggest that in worldly life, when you find the person you love, do not let yourself get carried away with joy. Do not become lost in it. And when you lose the one you love, do not be consumed by grief. Do not collapse entirely. One should maintain a sense of equanimity, neither too elated and joyful, nor too heartbroken and sorrowful. That seems to be the main message. So what does joyful yet not excessive actually mean? Joy is straightforward, happiness, delight, but not excessive, that's the key part. It points to this: when something comes along that makes us incredibly happy, we tend to lose control of our emotions, becoming overjoyed, even swept away by it completely, unable to pull ourselves back. In the world today, when people gain fame and wealth, they often become swept up in pride and self-importance. When you are happy, do not let the joy run away with you. Do not drown yourself in it. And then when you face losing a dear companion, or the death of a parent, or when you encounter all kinds of unpleasant things, sorrowful things, do not be lost in endless grief, utterly heartbroken, with no strength left to lift yourself up. Both of these, in truth, are extremes. Neither is healthy. So here, these two lines may look simple on the surface, but I do hope that we can often try to maintain this kind of balanced, steady attitude. Many people today talk about managing emotions, but when it comes to actually doing that, here is a small story from yesterday that captures this perfectly. Yesterday, I was wearing underneath something that is perfectly acceptable to wear around the academy, but there was a bit of red showing that kept peeking out. And our two managers here, the Khenpos, the senior monks who oversee conduct here, I thought if they noticed it might not look quite right, so I kept trying to tuck it away. But I just could not keep it hidden. Some of the lamas nearby may have noticed. The thing is, what I was wearing underneath is allowed, it just does not look quite right when it shows. So I kept trying to hide it. These managers of ours, even though they are not currently in their official roles, they still carry quite a presence. So today I just did not wear it at all, much more relaxed. Yesterday I may not have taught very well. That story just came to mind. So this little story raises a question: what does it actually mean to manage one's emotions? Now, broadly speaking, there seem to be some differences in how this is approached across different cultural traditions. In many Western psychological traditions, whether negative or positive, people tend to let emotions out rather than hold them in. The idea being that suppression is harmful, and that what they call releasing your true nature is healthy. The thinking goes, whether it's anger or longing or joy, express it fully. But according to Confucius's teachings, and likewise Buddhism as well, letting emotions run completely unchecked is actually harmful to you personally. It does not serve you well. So what is called for here is a kind of harmony, balance, or what we might call the middle way. This is very important. In Tibetan areas, the ancient teachings also express something similar. When you are happy, carry yourself as though you were in the midst of hardship. When things are hard, carry yourself as though things are good. For instance, if today everything is going wonderfully well, do not let yourself get too excited. Stay calm and composed, as though it is nothing particularly extraordinary. And when you are in pain, deeply sorrowful, carry yourself as though you are at peace, even cheerful. That is the balanced approach the ancients recommended. So we can see from this that a person needs a kind of inner harmony, a kind of balance. This is very important. Emotional harmony is one part of it, meeting whatever arises with a degree of steadiness, not swinging wildly between highs and lows. When happiness comes and you truly cannot hold it in, no matter what, you just cannot contain it. We have all seen this. Think of someone receiving an award on stage. Draped in a ceremonial sash, their face just overflowing with joy they simply cannot contain. Then there are others who, when faced with things like job loss, heartbreak, or all kinds of loss, are completely overwhelmed by suffering. Both of these really are extremes. So for a person, one thing is keeping one's own emotions balanced, and another is how we relate to others, whether in terms of affection or relationships. That too should follow a middle path. There is an old saying, "A noble person's friendship is like water, quiet, unassuming, but enduring." Not the kind that burns hot and fast and then burns out. When some people first get along well, they are inseparably close, and then the moment things cool off, they treat each other like enemies. Neither extreme is really healthy. So what is it that we need to understand here? It is about overall balance, not swinging to extremes of elation or anguish. If you are in too much pain, it is not good for you personally, and it is not good for your overall state of mind. There was once a man in Hungary. He faced tremendous suffering in his work, in his relationships, in almost every area of his life, and so he composed a piece of music. That piece of music was called Gloomy Sunday. I believe its actual title was The World's End. After he composed it, it seems it was written in 1933. Once it was finished, whoever heard this music was overcome with tremendous grief. Because at that time in Hungary, there was also a great deal of social unrest. The melody was later adapted and became the basis for various artistic performances. And this piece, people were plunged into such profound sorrow upon hearing it, that the song is reportedly linked to the deaths of over 150 people. I once deliberately listened to it myself, and honestly I felt nothing particular. Sometimes we simply cannot connect with many Western films either, and some of their music as well, we just do not get it. It seems Westerners are the same way. Westerners feel that certain Eastern films with very high box office returns are simply not interesting to them at all. People come from different places and probably hold different values. Eventually, Gloomy Sunday was banned, and that ban lasted 13 years. So in this world, whether it is writing a book, doing something, or saying certain words, some things carry tremendous power to affect people, because such language and such expression carries a kind of force. This is something everyone should understand. Whether it is a person, their words, or even the paintings we see on walls, all of these carry an invisible kind of power. This is very important. Why do I say this? Well, for instance, when you hear a song of utterly heartbreaking sorrow and grief, as you listen, gradually you find yourself wanting to cry. This is why when making a film, the background music must be carefully chosen, whether joyful, sorrowful, or frightening. This is something many directors take very seriously. So on the surface it might seem like there is no real difference. It is just sound after all. But what we need to understand is this: when we recite the 7-line prayer, a traditional Vajrayana invocation for example, there is genuinely a power in that sound. In our tradition we call it blessings or adhisthana, and in ordinary language people might call it energy or power, and it truly exists. This is why some practitioners often play songs of praise to the Guru and the 3 jewels, or Guru devotion prayers, because naturally over time those sounds quietly seep into your mind stream. Your body and mind receive the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. On the other hand, if we fill our daily lives with dark and disturbing content, frightening sounds, consider what has been reported about extremist training in Afghanistan. Many extremists during their training are constantly exposed to violent films and all kinds of violent content and sounds. Over time, a person's mind can be lit like a fuse and explode. This is something about human nature perhaps that is just how we are wired. So sometimes people, especially those new to the practice, ask, what is the point of reciting the Great Compassion Mantra and chanting the Diamond Sutra? It is just sound like anything else. But in truth, while it may sound the same to our ears, it carries its own distinct power. That is genuinely the case. I feel the same applies to painting. For example, when we see a painting on a wall, like the works of Van Gogh, some of the paintings he made, many people later found that as they kept looking, they felt themselves gradually and unknowingly pulled into and lost within the work. This happens. And consider this, why do temples hang thangkas and place the wheel of life at the entrance? It is because they invisibly bring you a kind of transformative power. We can observe this in everyday life. For instance, if someone deeply admires a particular celebrity and keeps a photo of them nearby, even the photo itself makes a difference. Say this person is a musician, hearing their voice, seeing their photo, gradually one receives something of their blessings and inspiration. This really does explain why temples display so many thangkas and Buddha statues. To the eye it may look like just a painted image on a wall, or simply a statue standing there, but in truth there is an invisible power within them. On this point, many of us probably need to explore and investigate further. I reflect on this myself. Sometimes this is how it is for us too. For instance, when you hear a particularly beautiful chanting of a scripture, almost without noticing, tears come to your eyes. When you are in a particular environment, the sounds it carries, the energy it holds, the kinds of friends that surround you, the forces around you, all of these are invisible influences. So consider this, a painting of a nude figure, for instance, it may stir in the viewer attraction or desire. But when you see an image of a Buddha or Bodhisattva and you gaze at it, it brings you a kind of blessing. The great Tibetan scholar Gendun Chopral once said that when he visited a shrine of another faith and prayed there with complete sincerity, he also found himself moved to tears. In truth, every sacred image, and indeed the other religious traditions in our world today, the Quran of Islam, the Bible of Christianity, we too can acknowledge that they carry a profound and mysterious power. That is my own view. We Buddhists may tend to only acknowledge that our scriptures are supreme while treating everything else as simply ordinary. But honestly, I don't think that's right. Throughout human history, every religion carries within it a certain mysterious power. Even the words of Confucius, his Analects, may carry a kind of blessing power, a kind of mysterious force, perhaps it does. Because as we read and study it, there are times when something feels different. So what he says here, joyful but not excessive, sorrowful but not distressing, please keep this in mind. In our daily lives, when we encounter moments of joy, even if you have to make a conscious effort, don't be overly exuberant. Restrain yourself a little, right? Otherwise, people are watching you, observing how you carry yourself. People around you are watching, and in a practice community like ours, they can sense whether your inner development has real depth. And when you encounter deep suffering, I was reminded of someone not long ago, someone I know lost a family member. Everyone around them was weeping and wailing, but this particular person was devoted to practice. Through his practice, he had arrived at a place of genuine acceptance, understanding that death is a natural part of life, so he remained quite composed. So it seems that genuine practitioners, those who have truly developed some inner realization, even when the person they love most departs, should not be overwhelmed by grief. I think especially of monastics. I've seen monks and nuns time and again, when a family member passes away, surrounded by people consoling them, breaking down in tears. In moments like that, grief is certainly understandable. Each of us has been through it, losing parents, losing loved ones. But surely it needn't come to that. Someone who has practiced impermanence, who has meditated on death and impermanence, yes, they may cry, but not like that in front of everyone. Though in some places it's customary, one is expected to cry, even if forced. If you don't cry, people there will feel that you don't love or respect your parents. That's the custom, that's how it's done. Maybe so, but I wouldn't recommend that monastics, when a family member passes, wail and sob loudly. That doesn't really serve anything. If you really must cry, cry quietly, but sometimes, even if you try to cry, the tears just won't come. Now let's continue our discussion of this saying from Confucius just now. When things are joyful, don't be swept away by elation. When things are painful, don't be crushed by sorrow. That's what it means. I think what he's saying is right. This is indeed how it should be. Now moving on, Duke Ai asked Zai Wo about the community altar. Zai Wo replied, the Xia dynasty used pine, the Shang dynasty used cypress, the Zhou dynasty used chestnut. He said the intent was to make the people tremble with awe. This is a separate passage. In this passage, Duke Ai was of the state of Lu, a figure comparable to a feudal lord, quite a well-known figure, a person of considerable standing. He posed a question to someone called Zai Wo. Now this Zai Wo was quite the eloquent speaker. It seems that when Confucius traveled to different states, he often brought Zai Wo along, but Confucius was sometimes displeased with him. It seems Zai Wo had a habit of dozing off during lessons, and so came the famous saying, rotten wood cannot be carved. Confucius said this directly about Zai Wo. Sometimes Confucius criticized him, and sometimes he praised him. In truth, Confucius did not simply praise a disciple unconditionally at all times, nor did he simply criticize a disciple endlessly in every situation. His way of reading people was always balanced and nuanced. He didn't see anyone as being like a Buddha, perfect in all qualities. That's not how he thought. A person in one situation may be admirable, worthy of praise because of the genuine contributions they've made, yet that same person in another situation may fall short. This is actually a very human approach. For example, among us human beings, as the saying goes, only a sage is truly free from fault, and none of us here are sages. Even if you are a noble being, even bodhisattvas from the first bhumi and above still have layers of obscuration yet to clear, both emotional and cognitive. How much more so for us ordinary beings? So Confucius's way of evaluating people was, on the whole, quite objective. So here what the text tells us is this. Duke Ai asked about the Shi, the altar, the Shi, the community altar, and its presiding spirit. And who was he asking? He was asking Zai Wo. Because this Shi altar was associated with ritual sacrifice, there would be a special wooden tablet, a kind of spirit tablet erected for it, something like that. And regarding this altar spirit tablet, he posed the question to Zai Wo. What exactly was this matter about? The question was, across different dynasties, what wood was used to make this altar, and how was it built? That was the question. Zai Wo then responded to Duke Ai by analyzing the entire historical context. How did he analyze it? He said the Xia dynasty used pine. The rulers of the Qai dynasty, its later sovereigns, used pine wood for their altar tablets. The Shang used cypress. Yin here refers to the Shang dynasty. The people of the Shang dynasty made their altar tablet primarily from cypress. So what we Tibetans call shupa, that is the cypress tree, was also held in high regard by the ancients of China. This cypress had many uses in their world. The Zhou dynasty used chestnut wood for their altar tablets. As for those earlier dynasties in different eras, the wood used for the ritual spirit tablets and for constructing the altar differed. On the surface, some passages in the Analects seem rather minor, but in truth they use small details to illuminate something much larger. That is a defining feature of the Analects. It is not the case that every passage has grand, sweeping scope, not at all. It often starts from a very small, specific point, and through it illuminates the culture of that time, the social conditions of that era, and even the character of the people involved, their wisdom, and so on. All of this comes through, then he said, to make the people tremble with awe. Now, across the different dynasties, each made its own choice, and the Zhou chose chestnut wood for their altar tablets. And according to Zai Wo, the intent behind that choice was to make the people tremble. Why did they use chestnut wood at that time? It seems the Zhou dynasty wanted its people, the common folk, to be intimidated by the use of chestnut wood, or at the very least, to inspire reverence and awe in them. This line is quite significant, because Zai Wo may have had some dissatisfaction with the society of his time, perhaps toward the Zhou dynasty. Now, Confucius lived during the spring and autumn period, several hundred years after the height of the Zhou dynasty. Yet Confucius deeply wished to revive the ideals of the Zhou dynasty, its wholesome traditions, and restore them to society. So Zai Wo, with a somewhat subtle and clever turn of phrase, was saying the Zhou dynasty used chestnut wood for the altar, but using chestnut wood actually carried a tone of intimidation, a kind of threat toward the common people. There's probably some historical context behind this. He was testing Confucius, probing his view on many of the Zhou dynasty's practices. Many people today do the same. They speak of what primitive society was like, or what feudal society was like, with a certain tone of judgment. In the same way, Zai Wo spoke of the Zhou dynasty with a slight undercurrent of dissatisfaction, and then he said the main point was that this was done to intimidate the common people. When the master heard this, he said, "What is done cannot be undone. What is past cannot be remonstrated. What has gone by cannot be blamed." When Confucius heard what Zai Wo had just said, what was his response? What is done cannot be undone. Things that have already come to pass, there is no use speaking of them now, because what cannot be changed has already passed. What has already gone by, saying anything about it now is of little use. What is past cannot be remonstrated, what is already in motion, because the matter is already settled. Trying to advise against it now is pointless. Actually, these two phrases, what is done cannot be undone, and what is past cannot be remonstrated, carry essentially the same meaning. What they're really saying is, there's no point digging up old grievances and trying to relitigate them now, or things that happened in the past. If you now dig them back up and bring them up again, it won't accomplish anything, nothing can change. When something cannot be changed, bringing it up again serves no real purpose. What has gone by cannot be blamed, things that have already happened. What is past, there is no need to hold anyone accountable. What has already passed, many things are simply beyond our reach now. Holding people accountable for them doesn't really help. On the surface, this looks like a simple historical exchange. At the time Duke Ai asked how these tablets were made, Zai Wo said some were made from pine, some from cypress. Even in Tibetan areas today, pine and cypress remain the most common trees. I don't know what chestnut is called in Tibetan. What has gone by cannot be blamed. What he mainly conveys here, this phrase at the end, what has gone by cannot be blamed, is a well-known Chinese idiom. Everyone should remember it. Now, when it comes to the interpretation, I looked at Nan Huaijin Mr. Nan Huaijin's commentary, and he essentially reads it as a historical observation, because during the Zhou dynasty there may have been intimidation and suppression of the common people. In most dynasties, the general social structure tended to work that way. The feudal lords, the governors, the kings, their relationship with the common people often carried an undercurrent of intimidation that was embedded within it. Then Chanmu's interpretation is somewhat different from this. He has an analysis. How does he analyze it? You see, what Zai Wo was expressing was a deeper dissatisfaction with the political situation of his day. At that time, three powerful families had begun to consolidate power, effectively sidelining Duke Ai. So Duke Ai was frustrated. Instead of speaking directly about it, he used this historical question as a way to voice his grievances. Indirectly, in front of Confucius. Speaking directly wasn't really appropriate, so he expressed it through indirect language. But Confucius was also very wise. He felt that if this matter was spoken openly, it might not be good for him either. So the meaning was that those matters of the Zhou dynasty in the past, once they're over, they're over. There's no need to pursue them again. If you pursue them, you won't be able to get anywhere anyway. Confucius used very subtle language. No matter what you do, there's no need to bring trouble upon yourself. If you continue to act this way, you might end up shooting yourself in the foot. It's dangerous and could lead to trouble. Later, it indeed turned out that way. During the warfare at that time, he had already failed. Confucius at that time essentially had a good understanding of the overall social situation. When he understood, well, if the other side is very powerful and you go to resist and do all kinds of unreasonable things, in the end you'll be the one who fails. As the old saying goes, when living under another's roof, you have no choice but to bow your head. You may see many social injustices, but you just keep it in your heart. There's suffering you cannot voice. Even if you speak out, it might be even more dangerous. In any era, this is how it tends to work. Rulers and politicians rarely show their hand directly. What they present on the surface, their stated reasons, their official narratives, is never quite the full picture. Behind it all, there are military calculations, personnel decisions, and power dynamics at play. That's why throughout history, politics never tells you the real story, straightforwardly. It always comes at you from an angle, and the real goal is something other than what's stated. This has been a common phenomenon since ancient times. So Confucius was quite wise. He advised everyone that it's best not to care too much or pursue these matters. If you pursue them further, you yourself might encounter trouble in the end. So their conversation at that time, Zai Wo really wanted to express some worldly matters, the intimidation of common people by the feudal lords at that time, or their threats expressed in another way. But Confucius understood the situation very well. His meaning was that what's past is past, so don't speak of it anymore. Some of us can't let go of old grievances. We carry them in our hearts, and we keep bringing them up. How unfair they were to me at that time, and it's still like this now. 10 years, 20 years have already passed, yet they're still brooding over it, talking endlessly about this matter. Actually, this doesn't have much meaning. This matter was already resolved at the time. What's past is past. There's no need to dig it up again. If you dig it up again, it might not be good for you either, especially when you encounter an opponent who is very strong. It's like throwing an egg against a boulder you already know who's going to break. Everyone should be clear about that. Now, although this story comes from over 2,000 years ago, it illustrates something that still holds true today. When a person is in an environment, they must learn to observe their own capabilities and at the same time observe the social phenomena of that time. If you overestimate yourself or are powerless, there's no need to say many things with your mouth. After saying them, perhaps your own safety, perhaps your own circumstances in various aspects become unfavorable. So Confucius was particularly good at adapting to the times, but in his bones he still had a very strong cultural foundation. This remained perpetually unextinguished. It was always very strong. But on the surface, or in reality regarding social relationship and social interactions, he was very skillful. When we study the Analects, it's not that we want to receive Confucius's mind transmission and blessings. It's not like that. But what do we want to gain? His way of conducting himself and handling affairs is also worth our learning from, because his very small and detailed matters can make us think over and over again. From this, in our future conduct and work, we can also apply it in many ways, and we can learn from it. Because when people do many things, it actually lies in the details and in the true logic. This is very important. So here everyone should mainly remember what is done, what has passed cannot be undone, and what is gone should be let go. Please remember these words often. Nelson Mandela, who would later become president of South Africa, spent over 10 years on Robben Island, imprisoned. When he came out, some of the prison guards had discriminated against him terribly. When he came out, someone asked if he particularly hated them. He said no. If not for that, I would still be in prison. Later, when he received the Peace Prize and became president of South Africa, he specifically invited those who had tormented him before. I have actually visited that prison cell myself, the small room where he was held for over 10 years. It still exists today. Now it has become a place that can be visited by people from all over the world. For him, his greatest quality was not holding grudges, because he had been imprisoned unjustly for years, and many guards had beaten and mistreated him. But when he came out, he completely had the power to take revenge on them, to imprison them. But his response was completely in the spirit of what we Buddhists would call cultivating loving kindness, and especially true bodhicitta in how he chose to treat them. Here it's the same. These matters of the king, if you keep bringing them up now, some of us have matters from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, with just a little bit of discord, digging them up and taking them to court again. Many things are unnecessary. Some of the good things from the past are worth remembering and worth sharing. As for the bad things, once they've passed, let them go. There's no need to bring them back up and lay them out on the table for analysis. If you do, the outcome won't be good. And if the other party happens to be a rather powerful organization or group, then in that case, it's even less worth doing. That's the idea here. Now, moving on, Confucius said, how narrow was Guanzhong's capacity? Someone asked, was Guanzhong frugal? He said Guanzhong had 3 estates. His officials held no concurrent posts. How could he be called frugal? Now, Guanzhong was also an official of his time. He seems to have been from the state of Qi. He lived before Confucius. Here Confucius is speaking about Guanzhong, saying that his capacity was rather limited. His breadth of mind, his overall stature, his cultivation, none of it was particularly high. In fact, regarding Guanzhong, Confucius in this passage is essentially speaking poorly of him. First, he was not frugal. Second, he didn't understand ritual propriety. Those are the main points. But I recall that later on there are passages praising Guanzhong highly because Guanzhong made enormous contributions to the people of his time. Without Guanzhong's skillful and timely leadership, Han Chinese civilization might well have been absorbed by neighboring groups long before it could flourish. That would have been a very different history. So throughout the history of the Han region, Guanzhong, in Confucius's eyes, made an extraordinarily great contribution. Yet here Confucius expresses dissatisfaction with Guanzhong, saying that Guanzhong was a person whose capacity, whose mind and heart was rather narrow. Then someone asked, was Guanzhong at least frugal? Was Guanzhong frugal? Was Guanzhong someone who, in his daily life, was content with little and desired little? Could that at least be said in his favor? And Confucius said Guanzhong had 3 estates, and his officials held no concurrent posts. Guanzhong had these 3, some interpret it as 3 treasuries, some as 3 residences, perhaps 3 villas or something like that, and some say 3 wives, and so on. There are different interpretations. The point is that Guanzhong had these 3 guoi, and furthermore the officials under Guanzhong were not consolidated together but were scattered in different places, and they lived rather lavishly. Because of how he managed things, his officials were spread out across various locations, setting up many posts, and as a result, his expenditures, the resources he squandered, were quite considerable. So his officials held no concurrent posts. How could he be called frugal? A person like this, could you really call him frugal? Could you say he desired little and was content? Look at Guanzhong's household, so extravagant, so lavish. So in general, historically, it seems that Guanzhong indeed was a rather extravagant person in his own way of living. But looking at this from another angle, the ancients thought about it differently. There is an ancient text called the Guanzi, written by Guanzhong's later followers. The Guanzhong, like the texts associated with Confucius, this was written by his later followers. The thing is, Guanzhong had a certain approach. He himself lived extravagantly, and he also encouraged certain officials to live lavishly as well. And actually, his approach was about stimulating consumption and driving economic activity. He had a whole theory behind it. Even in today's world, this question is still debated, and it may sound counterintuitive. Guanzhong's argument, is it better economically to have officials who spend lavishly, even corruptly, or fewer? On the surface, it seems obvious that fewer corrupt officials would be better. But when there are more corrupt officials, according to the thinking of Guanzhong and his school, it's possible that having more corrupt officials actually helps drive the economy and improve the livelihoods and economic growth of ordinary people. So in the early days, when some regions began to open up, some leaders said, didn't they, that no matter what, let some people get rich first. And indeed there were some corrupt officials, but the overall economy of society began to grow wealthy across the board. Later, through various measures, they began to crack down on those corrupt officials, and then the corrupt officials didn't dare spend. When corrupt officials stopped spending, ordinary people's consumption, as well many of the economic channels gradually began to contract. This seems, on the surface, like a very strange kind of logic, but this idea of Guanzhong's, it does seem that in the world there is indeed a logic of this kind. Another historical figure, Fan Zhongyan, an 11th century statesman and reformer, he also advocated that many officials should live somewhat lavishly, as this would benefit ordinary people as a whole, and the overall economy and livelihood of the surrounding populace. All of this would be helped by it. In general, there is a logic at work here, and this is something everyone should be aware of. People all over the world may also be paying close attention to this question. So again, from this economic perspective, does society function better when spending, even excessive spending, is high, or when everyone is restrained and frugal? If the honest, incorruptible people, the upright officials and the frugal, are in the majority, then the whole of society tends to become rather subdued and lacking in vitality. This is something you might notice when you go to cities, for example, these days, whether in county towns or larger cities. Basically, a lot of the spending power on leisure and enjoyment has been declining more and more. But there is a certain logic here, one that challenges our usual assumptions. Regardless, as for Guanzhong, he was certainly not frugal in his time. He was rather extravagant, that's the point. And then someone else asked, then did Guanzhong at least know ritual propriety? So this person is asking whether Guanzhong understood ritual and etiquette. Confucius said, the ruler of a state erects a screen at his gate. Guanzhong also erected a screen at his gate. The ruler of a state has a stand for replacing cups when hosting a fellow ruler. Guanzhong also had such a stand. If Guanzhong knew ritual, then who does not know ritual? The person had asked, how was Guanzhong, this official, did he understand the virtue and practice of ritual? Confucius said that generally speaking, the ruler of a state in those times could erect a screen gate being something like a decorative partition, and certain high officials were permitted to set up such a screen gate. Today it might be something like a folding screen. I'm not entirely sure of the specifics. I haven't gone into it in great detail. Confucius said that generally speaking, rulers and sovereigns were the ones who could erect a screen gate. But Guanzhong had also placed a screen gate at his own entrance, so he was quite full of pomp and pretension, not someone who truly understood propriety. Someone who truly understood propriety would know he was not a ruler, and since he was not a ruler, why would he do what only a ruler is entitled to do? He simply should not have. And there is also the matter of the feudal lord. The feudal lord, when hosting a fellow ruler, would have what? This fandian, it seems to have been some sort of stand for holding wine vessels, something like a side table. I'm not entirely sure what it was exactly. But there was this object when two rulers met together. They would share certain ritual utensils between them. This was something only a ruler was entitled to have. Yet Guanzhong also had a fandian. He had set one up as well. So it seems that what Confucius is pointing to is something like a small gate screen and a small platform. And from these small things, what can we infer? If Guanzhong knew ritual, then who does not know ritual? So you're saying Guanzhong, did he truly understand ritual? If Guanzhong truly understood ritual, then there would be no one in the world who doesn't. What Confucius is saying is, look at these two things Guanzhong did first, the matter of the screen gate. Only a ruler is entitled to have a screen gate, yet Guanzhong erected one. Second, only a ruler is entitled to have what? A fandian cup stand. And yet Guanzhong set one up. What right did he have? If he behaved this way in these two very specific matters, could he truly be said to understand ritual propriety? Clearly not. So what we see here is that from this person, a very small behavior can reveal how well a person truly understands ritual. For example, let's say someone is a monastic. A monastic has conduct befitting a monastic, and a layperson has their own conduct. Lay people have their own different roles and identities with different levels and stations for each. If a person deliberately acts in a manner befitting someone of a different station, then he does not understand ritual. From even one small detail, you can tell that this person doesn't really understand ritual. This may seem on the surface like a very small thing, but we can turn it around and say, when we evaluate a person, we should look at them from many different angles. People are not simply black or white. Truly, they have their good qualities and they have their shortcomings. But we should evaluate from many angles their character, their conduct, and many other aspects, rather than completely dismissing someone over a single thing. Just because this person did something bad doesn't mean we write them off entirely. And just because someone did one good thing doesn't mean everything about them is worthy of praise. It shouldn't work that way. So I believe it was Master Oji, the eminent Ming Dynasty monk, who said, when Confucius assessed people here, how balanced he was, how clear-eyed in his judgment of people, how even-handed, how clear. Because regarding Guanzhong, there are passages later where he is praised, and here Confucius points out that his understanding of ritual was lacking, and his frugality was also lacking. So Confucius's assessment of people was never based on just one thing. It's not like today. In today's society, it seems that once someone gets promoted, all their virtues seem to be suddenly complete and perfect. And if someone makes one mistake, all their faults seem to be complete as well. Not a single virtue remains. So I think what we want to say is our judgment of people also matters a great deal, and it's not always appropriate to simply praise someone without reservation. A few days ago, why was it that in our gathering here, the Khenpo was praised at the time? I didn't deliberately make things difficult for him. On one hand, I thought about it because of the praise from my past experience. Some people once praised, if their store of merit, their spiritual fortune is strong, they tend to be fine. But if their merit is not so great, obstacles and difficulties often arise, all kinds of them. So if someone receives too much praise, the question is whether they can really withstand it. That's one consideration. On the other hand, a person may have some truly outstanding qualities and also some not so good qualities. Everyone has shortcomings. No one is exempt. So over the past 2 days, I said it twice. The first time I remember saying something like, "Don't be arrogant," and so on. Then yesterday during the examination, I made a point of saying something specific. Today I want to offer some praise. He has truly contributed to our entire large academy with so many Khenpos and scholars present. His presentation at that time was a real success. And the paper he wrote, including his analytical ability and depth of understanding, is quite impressive in many respects. There are good qualities and there are shortcomings too. But with people, sometimes one good point gets blown out of proportion, and sometimes one flaw gets exaggerated far beyond what's fair. Neither is reasonable. So in a little while, I've specifically brought a kata, a traditional ceremonial scarf, and I plan to offer it to him in praise shortly. I want to learn from Confucius in this. It's not that I specially arranged this, for today I didn't know this content would come up today. But just now when I looked, there it was too. Yesterday he showed me the paper they wrote on the topic of Terma, Revealed Treasure Teachings. I didn't have time to read it in detail, but it should be very good. I hope that among those of us here present, in the future we may be able to accomplish some things together. Today Khenpo Tsultrim Lodra also mentioned to me among your students here, could some of them help with translations? I said yes, translation is possible, but it may not yet reach that level of quality. It's not that translation itself requires such a high level, but to truly do it well, some people may still need more practice. But I think we might be able to contribute, particularly in the area of Tibetan culture and heritage. AI is truly making enormous breakthroughs across the entire world right now. So let's think about what we can do here, whether it's Tibetan culture, Buddhism, or technology. We shouldn't limit ourselves to just learning a little for our own sake. Understanding a bit of the Dharma for ourselves is good, but whether we'll have the ability or opportunity to teach the Dharma in the future, that's hard to say. But at least we should be able to contribute something to our own community and to Buddhism as a whole. But doing this well is quite challenging. Organizing everything, seeing it through from start to finish, takes a lot of effort. We do have this aspiration though. Khenpo tends to think of things in simpler terms. At first he said we were hopeless, and now apparently we're incredibly capable. But I feel we're neither hopeless nor exceptionally remarkable. Everyone is doing well, but we're not extraordinary either. We all know each other. Every one of us has our strengths and our weaknesses. We should evaluate things fairly, looking at both sides. Either way, we all need to keep working hard. I hope everyone here will put in that effort. Now, returning to Confucius, we were just discussing his words a moment ago. Let's pick up where we left off and continue a little. The next passage describes Confucius speaking with the Grand Music Master of the state of Lu on the subject of music. He said, "Music, this can be understood. At the opening, all instruments sound together. As it unfolds, it is pure and harmonious, clear and distinct, flowing continuously to its completion. Without some explanation, you'd have no idea what any of this means. There are classical Chinese particles like ruye, ruye that are almost untranslatable. The ancients really were something else. For comparison, the Tibetan Buddhist canon, the Kangyur, is actually fairly accessible once you know the language. But classical Chinese like this can be genuinely opaque. Here are the original Chinese terms. I'll read them out and then explain each one. Shi ru ye, chun ru ye, jiao ru ye, yi ru ye. Ye Cheng. What he is describing here is Confucius speaking to the Grand Music Master of the state of Lu, a master who was well versed in music. He was a great master in his field. Confucius was speaking about music in Lu, and he said this music can be understood. It is not beyond knowing. The knowledge of music can be grasped. So how is it grasped? What exactly is Confucius saying here? Shizu, first, there is a beginning. Music has a beginning. Shizu, the music brings together all the instruments, piano, erhlu, flute, all kinds of instruments. Shiru means they all come together, gathered and unified, first establishing an overall arrangement, a unified whole. From there, Kongshi Chunru Ye. Chunru means the music, each part has its own purity, free from confusion. For a skilled musician, there is a clear main thread, a melody, a composition, a score, all of it is there. Each element is utterly pure and clean, with its own guiding thread. That is the second quality. The third, Joru Yi, the music throughout is clear, distinct and well defined. For a skilled musician, whether it's the rises and falls of the melody or the rhythmic phrasing, there is a very clear inner logic. Finally, Yiru, Ye Yi, as in unceasing flow, meaning that the content and the whole meaning flows on without interruption, a continuous thread like a silk thread, unbroken. And finally, Yi Chen, it reaches completion, successfully brought to its end. So the meaning is, a piece of music has its whole process. First, all the conditions come together. Then it has its purity. Then it has a very clear internal logic. And finally, it flows on without interruption. Many people today apply this to things like organizational management of a company. If we're talking about running a business, these are actually things worth knowing. From the very beginning, you need to know to bring all your people together. Whoever is needed, all of them gathered as one. Then there needs to be clarity within, clear management and well-defined roles, without internal friction from that division of roles. The division of responsibilities should be phased, like a project. What gets done at this stage? What gets done at the next? Each level should be clearly defined. And finally, it must continue without interruption, not just for a day or two, not the kind of approach where you work hard for 2 days and then abandon it for 3. Not like that. It needs to have continuity throughout. If we approach our endeavors with both comprehensiveness and a clear sense of structure, with real clarity at every level, things should come to completion. So here, Confucius appears on the surface to be simply speaking to the music master of Lu about music, saying that if we study music carefully, it's not so mysterious. It really just comes down to these stages, this kind of process. But in truth, it's not just about music. It applies to everything in human life, any undertaking at all. At the outset, there is a plan with clear goals. In the middle, there is reasonable management and clearly defined roles, a well-functioning team, and then you keep going without giving up. In the end, the thing should succeed. So a lot of what Confucius says is like that. It's almost like guessing a riddle, where he uses something like music or a ritual ceremony to make a broader point. But from another angle, the ancients really were different. They weren't as restless and impulsive as people are today. Nowadays, when people feel inspired, they dive in, they try it once or twice. And today, so many people who want to start a business or go into commerce, they launch something, give it 2 or 3 days, and if business isn't good after 2 or 3 days, they immediately shut it down and try something else. Day after day with no plan, no solid strategy, no focused approach, no real discipline in managing themselves or others. And when they hit the smallest obstacle along the way, they can't face it or keep things going, and they simply give up. The ancients, by contrast, seem to have been steadier and more grounded, unlike people today. These days, you see so many people, whether online or in everyday life, when they're happy, they act like they've lost their minds, overjoyed, tears streaming down their faces. And when they're suffering, many choose to take their own lives. It's truly heartbreaking. People today are often simply not prepared for life's hardships. No one really taught them how. Many schools and many parents focus only on technical skills. They forget to teach their children how to be human. And that's a real gap. Living in this world takes more than book learning. The real difficulties, the pain of relationships, the exhaustion of trying to communicate, these things require a kind of inner skill. Now, monastics may be sheltered from some of this, living in a relatively pure environment. Perhaps monastics live in a world that is relatively pure and mostly unaware of what's happening in the world outside. But for those living in the world, they generally have quite a lot of lived experience. So whether it's Buddhism or Confucianism, there are teachings worth learning from. They can genuinely be helpful. All right, that's where we'll end our discussion of the Analects for today.
Chupun Tsulen Chua Chua Shio
Bandar Gara Badma Asadar Bandar Gara Badma Asadar Bandar Gara Badma Asadar